Well, the GOP is scrambling to unite behind someone as these primaries begin to ramp up and we get toward the finish line. Real Clear Politics reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns on how this can, how really will they deal, the RNC, with all this division, Caitlin, within the party, because now everyone's sort of looking and saying, at least I know, I can speak for myself, the pledge seems really dumb now in hindsight. In the first place, it would seem that the GOP nominee and everyone else who ran for that particular spot should support the eventual nominee.
Right, and you could argue that the RNC really brought this on themselves. As Blake alluded to, remember how big of a spectacle that Donald Trump signing of the pledge was last summer? What I think is so notable now, though, is Ted Cruz and John Kasich backing away from that pledge. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, Ted Cruz was still insisting that he would support the eventual nominee. And so the question becomes, heading into Cleveland, how does this party possibly unite around an eventual nominee when you have the two other candidates saying that they couldn't support the front runner of the party right now?
Well, and the interesting thing is that they all have different reasons to a degree, different rationales for potentially not supporting the nominee. In case of Ted Cruz, 2 weeks ago, things were slightly different. Right. That was before the War of the Wives. And John Kasich separating himself as the sort of adult in the room. So once you say, I'm the adult in the room, do you go back and say, but I picked the toddler? You know, so to a degree, they put themselves in these boxes, and it's hard for them to escape them.
Right. That's an important point about Cruz. I mean, the developments surrounding his wife are just really changed the game on this. But John Kasich, too, is really hoping to get to an open convention. I mean, that is his only hope of securing the nomination. He can't get the necessary delegates at this point, so he hopes to get to an open convention and contest it. So, but there is a certain amount of hypocrisy here, right? With all this time, the candidates have been saying that they would support the eventual nominee while calling Trump, saying Trump saying all these bad things about Trump. And so to then turn around and be able to support him, it doesn't really make much sense either.
Well, and again, it's interesting because Ben Carson, after leaving the race, did come out and he did support Donald Trump. And Trump had some harsh things to say about him, and Carson looked at it as just being part of the game, if you will. You would think some of these folks who've been in this longer than Carson would look at it the same way. This is all just sort of part of the nominating process. People are going to have bruised feelings. Some things going to be said. Some may be true, some may not be true, because they're really, they're fighting for the ultimate job in the world.
Right. That's an important point. But I think the other thing to consider is the party platform here. You have Ted Cruz arguing, and John Kasich to some extent, that Trump isn't a conservative. He's not a Republican. And so being able to support the nominee doesn't necessarily, doesn't only involve the campaign tactics. It also involves the party platform and the candidates' positions. And Cruz and Kasich have made the case that this guy, Trump, is not consistently or sufficiently conservative. Right. So I could see them trying to make that argument, and other, delegates or party officials trying to make that argument
what
as
a lot
well.
of Trump voters are saying, and as I watch this whole thing evolve, initially they were saying he is conservative, and then later on, the majority of them that I've seen at least have said, no, he really probably is not conservative in the old definition of it, but perhaps the GOP, the grand old party, should be evolving, should be moving to different norms, and it should not necessarily be about the old conservatism. That should not necessarily be the platform. And if that is the case, is it far-fetched to consider maybe this becoming two separate parties somewhere? This is the beginning of a real break here?
It's not far-fetched to think that. Actually, what's interesting, the whole irony of this situation is now, the pledge was designed last summer to prevent Trump from waging a third party or an independent bid, leaving the party. And now the concern is from the Trump campaign that maybe Cruz or Kasich or, Mitt Romney has even said that he could not bring himself to support Trump, and if he were the nominee, he would write someone in. Right. So the irony of this whole thing is perhaps a third party or an independent bid by one of these other rivals who tried to stop Trump from doing this in the first place.
I think you could break this GOP into three parties right now. I really do. I think that should be three separate parties because that's how divided the ideologies are.
You're exactly right, and they're represented by those three candidates who are still remaining.
I think he's been too quiet. We're going to have to hear from him sooner rather than later. Thanks a lot.
I agree with you.
Really appreciate it, Kat.